Ben found an old radio in his attic, still functional despite its age. Late at night, it would turn on by itself, emitting static. One night, through the white noise, he heard his deceased mother's voice calling his name. He tried speaking back, and the voice grew clearer, begging for help and warning him to leave the house. Ignoring the warning, Ben listened for hours. The next morning, the radio was gone, and so was Ben. All that remained was static echoing through the house. The night was still, as Clara knelt before the weathered tombstone, her breath visible in the chill. It had been years since she visited her grandmother's grave, but the locals whispered of strange happenings in the cemetery. They said it was haunted, cursed even, but Clara dismissed those tales as mere folklore. Tonight was different. She had come to perform the last rites, to seek closure. As she recited the words, an unnerving wind swept through the trees, rustling the leaves like whispers. Suddenly, she felt a presence, cold and watching. The air thickened and her heart raced. Clara glanced up, startled to see shadows shifting among the graves, figures cloaked in darkness, with hollow eyes fixed on her. Panic surged within her. She hurried to finish the rites, but the shadows drew closer, their outlines now distinct. A voice, raspy and echoing, called her name. "You shouldn't have come here," it warned. Clara's hands trembled as she completed the incantation, but it felt futile. The last words echoed, and the shadows lunged, pulling her into the earth. As silence fell, the grave stood unmarked, yet a new figure loomed, waiting for the next visit, for the next last rites. The Tanners had always dreamed of a quiet life, so when they found a charming cottage on Ashwood Lane, they were thrilled. The street was lined with tall trees, and the houses seemed to glow warmly under the setting sun. But the moment they moved in, something felt wrong. The neighbors' homes looked perfect, yet no one ever appeared outside. The street was always silent, with not a sound to be heard, not even the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The Tanners assumed it was just a peaceful area, but as days went by, their unease grew. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the Tanners noticed a light flickering in the house across the street. They walked over, drawn by curiosity, and found the front door slightly ajar. Stepping inside, they felt an immediate coldness, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The living room was meticulously clean, but it felt like no one had lived there for years. The only sound was the faint ticking of a clock, its hands frozen in time. As they explored, they found a door leading to the basement. The stairs creaked underfoot as they descended. In the basement, they found a small, dimly lit room with a single chair in the center. Scattered around it were old, faded photographs, each one depicting a smiling family member, but their faces were scratched out. The Tanners turned to leave, but the door slammed shut. A whisper filled the room, "Stay with us." The Tanners tried to scream, but their voices were lost in the silence. The house had claimed them, and Ashwood Lane would never be the same again. It appeared overnight, a carnival on the edge of town that no one remembered arriving. Bright lights and haunting music lured in visitors. Amy and her friends decided to explore it, excited by the strange rides and games. But as the night went on, they realized something was wrong. The rides operated without attendants, the food tasted like ash, and the other patrons had hollow, glowing eyes. Amy tried to leave, but every exit led her back to the carousel. Her friends vanished one by one, their laughter replaced by screams. The next day, the carnival was gone, leaving only Amy's shoe in the empty field. The old factory had been abandoned for decades, its shadows thick with dust and memories. When Mia stumbled upon a half-hidden entrance in the ground, curiosity pulled her in. The air was cool and stale, thick with an unsettling silence. As she ventured deep, the faint sound of dripping echoed in the distance. Her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shapes on the crumbling walls. Each step seemed to provoke the darkness, filling her with a sense of dread. Suddenly, the echoes began to shift, whispers that felt almost familiar, as if someone was calling her name. "Mia, come closer." Heart racing, she pressed on, convinced it was her brother, lost in the depths years ago. The voices grew louder, more insistent, leading her down a narrow passage. She called out, but her words swallowed by the darkness. At last, she reached a small chamber, and the whispers stopped. A chill ran down her spine as she realized she wasn't alone. Shadows writhed along the walls, forming the shape of her brother, eyes hollow and pleading. But as she reached out, a cold hand gripped her ankle, pulling her down into the abyss where the echoes now belonged to her. When the Hargraves moved to Maple Street, they expected a peaceful life. The neighborhood was quiet, with perfectly manicured homes and neat gardens. Yet something was off. No sounds of children playing, no neighbors chatting, just a deep, unnerving silence. Days passed, and the Hargraves noticed that no one ever ventured outside. The curtains in every house remained drawn, and the streets stayed empty. Curiosity turned to unease as they realized they never saw a single neighbor. One evening, a low hum filled the air, coming from the house at the end of the street. The Hargraves, compelled by an odd pull, approached. The door creaked open when they tried it, and inside the air was heavy, stagnant. The walls were lined with photos, but every face was blurred, erased from existence. A sound emerged from the basement, a slow, rhythmic thumping. Against their better judgment, they descended the stairs. In the dim light, they saw rows of empty chairs, all facing a broken TV screen. The screen flickered, displaying one word: watch. The truth hit them all at once. The neighbors hadn't left. They had been replaced. Their memories, their lives, all absorbed by something darker. As the Hargraves turned to flee, the basement door slammed shut. The word flashed again on the screen: watch. And the hollow residents of Maple Street waited. In the dim light of her attic, Sarah discovered an ornate, locked box, its surface etched with intricate symbols that seemed to writhe under her gaze. The key was nowhere in sight, yet a whispering urge gripped her heart. She could feel a presence, an awareness that something was waiting just beneath the surface. Ignoring her better judgment, she pried it open with a crowbar, the metal screeching in protest. As the lid creaked ajar, an icy gust swept through the room, snuffing out her lantern and plunging her into darkness. A rush of shadows coiled around her ankles, seeping from the box, forming grotesque shapes that danced menacingly. Panic surged within her. The air became thick with a suffocating dread. Then, from the depths of the box, a voice croaked, low and raspy. "You've let me out." Heart pounding, she stumbled backward, the realization dawning. The box contained not treasure, but a malevolence she had unleashed. The shadows lunged, coiling tightly around her, and in a twisted final moment, her scream echoed, swallowed by the consuming dark. The box slammed shut, waiting, once again, for the next curious soul. Emily found the amulet buried in the garden, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Intrigued, she slipped it around her neck, unaware of its sinister history. A whisper echoed in her mind, promising a wish for every thought. Skeptical yet curious, Emily closed her eyes and wished for her ailing mother to recover. The next morning, her mother appeared vibrant and healthy, a joy that quickly turned to dread as the amulet pulsed against her chest. Days passed, each wish granted: a promotion, newfound beauty, even the return of lost friends. But with every wish, something was stolen from her. An old photograph of her mother, the laughter of her friends, the spark in her own eyes dimming. Desperate, Emily wished to understand the amulet's true nature. Nightmares invaded her sleep, visions of shadowy figures and anguished screams revealing the truth. The amulet was a parasite, feeding on memories, twisting love into torment. In a final bid for freedom, Emily wished to destroy it. The amulet shattered, but its shards embedded in her skin, merging with her forever. Now she is left with nothing but the hollow echoes of her past, a living reminder of the price of desire. On a stormy night, Maya's phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, a chilling, wavering voice begged for help. The line crackled, and the call ended abruptly. She thought it was a prank until the calls began happening every night at exactly 3 a.m. Each time the voice grew more frantic, crying about being trapped. One night the voice whispered, "I'm in your house." Maya froze. The call wasn't coming from her phone anymore, but from the landline, a landline that had been disconnected for years. The police found the phone shattered, but Maya was never seen again. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, the Thompsons were the first to go. One morning, Sarah noticed their house eerily dark, the lawn unkempt. Days passed, and still no sign of them. Whispers among the neighbors grew. They just packed up and left, some said, but Sarah felt an unsettling dread. She approached their house, glancing through the grimy windows. Inside, furniture was untouched. a plate of food still on the table, rotting. She turned to leave, but a chill ran down her spine. A faint whisper echoed from the shadows, calling her name. "Sarah." It beckoned, soft and sinister. Heart racing, she rushed home, locking the door behind her. A week later, the Millers vanished too. Then the Johnsons. The town became a ghost, haunted by the absence of its residents. The whispers grew louder each night, filling Sarah's dreams with terror. Desperate, she reached out to the last few neighbors, but they all looked at her with vacant eyes as if they'd already departed. One night, she awoke to find her front door slightly ajar. The whispers beckoned her again, now a chorus. She stepped outside, and in that moment she understood she was next. As she vanished into the night, her house remained, waiting for the next lost soul. Late at night, Sarah's phone rang, slicing through the silence of her empty apartment. It was a number she didn't recognize. The screen lit up with a name that sent a shiver down her spine. Her own. Hesitating, she answered. "Hello." A breathy silence lingered before a voice, deep and unsettling, whispered through the receiver. "Are you alone?" Panic surged through her veins. She slammed the phone down, her heart thundering. It couldn't be her own voice. It was impossible. Yet the phone rang again. Against her instincts, she picked up. "What do you want?" she demanded. The voice chuckled darkly, the sound echoing in her mind. "You invited me in the last time, remember?" Memories flooded her. An old, dusty mirror she found at a yard sale, its surface warped and strange. She had laughed at the odd reflections it cast. "You're not real," she shouted, but the laughter only grew louder. Shadows twisted in the corners of her vision, darkening the room. The voice leaned closer, a hiss now. "But you called me first. Now I'm coming for you." The temperature dropped, her breath visible in icy puffs. With a final flicker, the lights went out, leaving her in the suffocating dark. The call ended, but the laughter remained, echoing endlessly. During a Halloween sale, Claire bought an antique mask from a mysterious vendor. When she put it on, it seemed to meld to her face, its hollow eyes glowing faintly. At first, it felt thrilling, but soon she couldn't remove it. Her reflection in the mirror began to change, showing someone else's face beneath the mask. At night, she felt it tightening, whispering her deepest fears. Days later, Claire vanished, and the mask returned to the vendor's stall, waiting for its next owner.
What if I told you there's a forest so haunted, locals won't set foot in it after dark? Deep in Romania lies the Hoia Baciu Forest, often called the Bermuda Triangle of Transylvania. Known for its twisted trees and eerie silence, the forest is home to countless tales of disappearances, ghostly apparitions, and unexplainable phenomena. Legend has it that a shepherd once entered the forest with 200 sheep, and none of them were ever seen again. Another story speaks of a little girl who vanished, only to reappear years later, unchanged and with no memory of where she'd been. People report feeling watched, sudden nausea, and even strange lights floating between the trees. And then there's the forest's infamous clearing, a perfect circle where nothing grows, said to be a portal to another dimension. Paranormal investigators have recorded bizarre energy readings here, but no one can explain why it exists. Would you dare to enter this forest of nightmares? Subscribe for more spine-chilling tales from around the world.
Ella was walking home late when she noticed someone following her. A man with a wide, unnatural smile. At first she thought he was harmless, but his grin never faltered, his pace matching hers exactly. When she started running, so did he, yet his expression remained eerily calm. She reached her apartment and locked the door, but the smile was waiting outside her window. The next morning, she was gone, and all that remained was a mirror, cracked and reflecting a grinning face that wasn't hers. As night fell, the old library transformed into a labyrinth of shadows. Margaret, the lone librarian, loved the scent of aged paper and the quiet comfort of the stacks. But tonight, a disquieting chill crept through the aisles. She turned a page in her book, but the silence was soon shattered by the unmistakable sound of books sliding off the shelves. Heart racing, she glanced around, convinced it was just her imagination playing tricks. Yet, the air thickened, and the lights flickered ominously. With trepidation, she ventured deeper into the stacks, each step echoing in the stillness. The books seemed to whisper secrets she couldn't comprehend. An unsettling sensation gripped her as she noticed volumes rearranged, titles she never placed there. Suddenly, a heavy thud behind her made her spin around. Nothing was there, just the oppressive darkness. But when she turned back, the books were in disarray again, forming a clear path towards a forgotten corner of the library. Curiosity outweighed fear, and Margaret followed. She stumbled upon an ancient tome, open to a page depicting a shadowy figure. Her blood ran cold as she felt cold breath on her neck, realizing too late that she was never alone in the library. In a small town, there's a staircase in the woods that's been there as long as anyone can remember. It's pristine, with no sign of wear or connection to any building. The locals warn against climbing it, but thrill seekers can't resist. Jason and his friends decided to test the legend. The first step felt like stepping into another world. The air grew colder, the sounds of the forest faded. As Jason climbed higher, he noticed his friends growing smaller, as if they were miles away. When he reached the top, he vanished. The staircase remains, waiting for the next curious soul. Rob loved old electronics, so when he found a vintage TV at a thrift store, he couldn't resist. The TV only picked up one channel, broadcasting static. He figured it was broken, but enjoyed the aesthetic. Late one night, the static began to form shapes. Faces, hands pressing against the screen, mouths opening in silent screams. Then came the voices, distorted but begging for help. Rob tried unplugging the TV, but it wouldn't turn off. Instead, the static grew louder. The faces, more desperate. The last thing his neighbors heard was a loud crash, followed by static bleeding through their own TVs. Mark was driving late at night when he saw a hitchhiker standing by the side of the road. Feeling generous, he stopped. The hitchhiker, a pale man in old-fashioned clothing, climbed in without a word. As they drove, Mark tried to make conversation, but the hitchhiker remained silent, staring straight ahead. When Mark glanced at the passenger's reflection in the rearview mirror, there was nothing there. Panicked, he turned to look, but the seat was empty. The car swerved off the road, and when the police arrived, they found only Mark, his eyes wide with terror, mumbling about a man who wasn't there. When Marie inherited her grandmother's old camera, she discovered a peculiar photograph hidden in the back of the dusty case. It depicted a hauntingly beautiful landscape bathed in twilight, yet something felt off. As she examined the image more closely, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Every night, the photograph would change, revealing something darker and more sinister. On the first night, a shadowy figure appeared in the corner, barely visible but unmistakably watching. The second night, the figure grew larger, its grotesque face emerging from the darkness. By the third night, twisted trees surrounded the figure, their gnarled branches reaching out like claws. Each morning, Marie awoke to a new horror. She tried to destroy the photograph, but it always reappeared, as if it had a will of its own. On the fourth night, the figure stepped out from the shadows entirely, its eyes locked onto hers. Heart racing, Marie realized the horrifying truth. The photograph wasn't merely changing, it was a countdown. As she trembled in fear, the creature whispered her name. The camera clicked, capturing her final moment before darkness consumed her. The next day, a new photograph emerged. This time it was of Marie, smiling, with the figure lurking behind her.
What if I told you about a creature that doesn't just stalk its prey, but becomes their shadow? In the remote villages of North India, there's a chilling legend of the Andhera Jagran, or the darkness stalker, a sinister being that thrives in the twilight hours. The Andhera Jagran is said to attach itself to a person by merging with their shadow, invisible to the naked eye. It waits patiently, feeding on their energy until the victim grows weak, pale, and collapses. The only way to survive is to recognize the creature before it fully takes hold. But here's the twist. Once someone realizes their shadow is not their own, they must trap it in total darkness before sunrise. If they fail, the creature consumes not just their life, but their identity, leaving behind an empty shell of a person, forgotten and unrecognizable. Strange, distorted shadows and mysterious deaths have haunted locals for generations, especially during new moons when the world is at its darkest. Is this a warning to respect the unseen forces of the night, or does the darkness stalker still roam, silently waiting for its next victim? What if I told you there's a creature lurking in the Congo swamps, a dinosaur-like beast known as Mokele Mbembe? This legendary giant, often described as a long-necked sauropod, has haunted local folklore for centuries. The origins of this tale stem from the indigenous peoples, who claim encounters with the creature as far back as the 18th century. Explorers and scientists have reported sightings, but no definitive evidence exists. The swamps, rich in biodiversity, become a perfect hiding ground for this elusive entity. Some believe it's a remnant of a prehistoric era, while others argue it symbolizes nature's untamed spirit. Dare you venture into its territory? Subscribe for more chilling tales.
The Bennett family was ecstatic to move into their newly renovated Victorian home. It had charm, space, and just enough creaks in the floorboards to feel nostalgic. Among the rooms was a locked door at the end of the upstairs hallway. The realtor claimed it was a storage room with no key. Curiosity grew. Weeks passed, and strange noises started coming from behind the door. Soft scratching, faint whispers, and sometimes what sounded like a child laughing. Convinced it was just an animal trapped inside, the Bennetts hired a locksmith. When the door creaked open, they found a small, dusty bedroom. Toys were scattered on the floor, and the wallpaper was peeling, revealing a name etched repeatedly beneath it: Lila. Their daughter Emily grew obsessed with the room, spending hours talking to someone they couldn't see. She insisted Lila was her new friend. At first, they dismissed it as imagination, but when Emily began waking with scratches on her arms, they grew concerned. One night, a loud crash from the locked room jolted them awake. Rushing inside, they found Emily sitting in the dark, smiling. "Lila says you can stay," she whispered. Behind her, the wallpaper peeled away, revealing hundreds of names scratched into the walls. The last name was Bennett. The door slammed shut, and no one heard from the family again. Weeks later, a new family toured the house. The realtor smiled and gestured at the locked door. "Just a storage room," she said. Emma found the doll in her grandmother's attic, its porcelain face cracked, but its eyes eerily lifelike. It seemed to whisper at night, but Emma dismissed it as wind through the old house. One night, she woke to find the doll sitting on her chest, its tiny hands clutching her throat. "Play with me," it whispered. She threw it into the fireplace, but the flames didn't consume it. Instead, the doll stood up, its cracked smile widening. The next day, Emma's parents found her room empty, except for the doll, perfectly pristine. The Wright family was excited to move into their new home, nestled in the quiet hills. The house on Hollow Ridge was everything they wanted: spacious, secluded, and surrounded by nature. But from the moment they arrived, a sense of unease settled over them. The neighborhood was strangely still. The other houses were pristine, but not a soul was ever seen. No one walked their dogs, mowed their lawns, or even waved from the windows. The Wrights assumed it was just a peaceful area, but the silence quickly became oppressive. Days passed and the stillness continued. One evening, as dusk settled, the family noticed an old lantern glowing faintly in the window of the house next door. Intrigued, they walked over. The door creaked open, and they stepped inside. The house was perfectly maintained but cold, as if abandoned for years. A feeling of dread washed over them as they moved deeper into the house, drawn toward the basement. They opened the door and descended into the darkness, only to find an empty room with a single wooden chair in the center. On the walls were countless portraits, but each face had been scratched out, leaving only blank eyes staring back at them. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. A whisper echoed from the shadows, "You're home now." The Wrights turned to flee, but their own faces were now among the portraits on the walls. Hollow Ridge had claimed them, just as it had claimed the others before them. In an abandoned mansion, Max discovered a painting of a woman whose eyes seemed to follow him. Intrigued, he took it home. That night, he heard footsteps in his hallway and found the painting hanging above his bed, though he'd left it in the living room. The woman in the portrait now had a faint smile, and her hand seemed to reach out of the frame. By morning, Max was gone, his face now part of the painting, while the woman's smile widened. Driving home late at night, Paul took a shortcut through a desolate stretch of road. After hours of driving, he realized he hadn't seen any signs or landmarks. The road seemed endless. His gas gauge neared empty, and his phone had no signal. He turned around, but the scenery remained the same: pitch-black trees and a winding road. Exhausted, he pulled over and fell asleep. When he woke up, he was in his bed, his car keys on the nightstand. But his car was never found, and Paul never took that shortcut again. Sarah had always felt uneasy in her grandmother's old house, an eerie structure that groaned like a living thing. with its warped door and dusty corners, had long been a source of frightful stories. One stormy night, a thunderclap jolted her awake, and she heard it, a faint whispering, as if someone was beckoning her from above. Heart racing, she tiptoed across the creaking floorboards, the whispers growing clearer, almost urgent. "Come up, come play," they lured. Against her better judgment, she reached for the attic door, twisting the rusty knob as it creaked open. The air inside was thick, stale, and heavy. Shadows danced in the dim light of her phone. The whispers became frantic, echoing off the walls, a cacophony of voices pleading and mocking. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through, extinguishing her light. The whispers turned into anguished screams surrounding her, enveloping her in darkness. Panic surged as she stumbled back, her heart pounding. But as she turned to flee, she felt a hand, icy and unforgiving, grasp her wrist. The whispers fell silent, the attic door slammed shut, and Sarah was never seen again, a lost voice among the shadows. The Carters moved into the old farmhouse on Willow Lane, enchanted by its rustic charm. The neighbors avoided discussing its history, offering only one warning: keep the barn locked at night. At first, life was peaceful, but one evening, a faint light appeared in the barn, a lantern flickering in the darkness. John Carter went to investigate and found the barn door ajar. Inside, the lantern hung from a beam, swinging gently. Beneath it, a mound of freshly turned dirt caught his eye, though nothing seemed out of place. The next night, the lantern returned, swaying violently. Footprints led from the barn to the woods, but no one had been there. Soon, whispers began at night, faint but clear. Leave. Their daughter, Sarah, started sleepwalking, always toward the barn. One stormy night, she disappeared. They found her inside, digging frantically at the dirt pile with her bare hands. When they pulled her away, she whispered, "He's waiting." Beneath the dirt, they uncovered a rotted wooden box containing human bones and a rusted lantern. The whispers stopped briefly, but shadows began creeping into the house. By dawn, the Carters fled the farmhouse, abandoning everything. That night, the lantern's glow returned, patiently waiting for its next visitors. In the cobwebbed corner of her late grandfather's workshop, Mia discovered an ornate music box, its wood chipped, and the figurine of a ballerina, missing an arm. Curious, she wound it up, and a haunting melody filled the air, discordant yet strangely hypnotic. What Mia didn't realize was that the music box once belonged to a girl named Celeste, who died tragically on the night of her final ballet performance. As the days passed, the music box would play on its own, its eerie tune echoing through the house. Mia began to notice fleeting glimpses of a figure in a tattered ballet costume reflected in mirrors and windows. She found herself inexplicably drawn to dance, her movements mirroring routines she'd never learned. One night, Mia awoke to find her feet blistered and bruised as though she'd been performing for hours. Desperate for answers, Mia uncovered an old newspaper clipping. Celeste's life was cut short in a tragic fall after someone sabotaged her performance. The music box, cursed by Celeste's unfulfilled dreams, ensnared those who touched it, forcing them to complete her final dance. Terrified, Mia tried to return the box to the workshop, but it followed her, always reappearing at her bedside. The final time she wound it, the melody grew deafening, and Celeste's figure materialized, whispering, "You'll dance for me forever now." Mia's screams were lost in the swirling music as the world faded into shadow. While exploring the storage room of her new home, Claire uncovered an antique mirror framed in tarnished silver, its surface slightly warped. Fascinated, she hung it in her bedroom, unaware of the stories tied to it. The mirror had once belonged to a recluse named Eliza, who disappeared without a trace, leaving behind whispers of a cursed reflection that consumed her. At first, the mirror seemed ordinary, but soon Claire noticed oddities. Her reflection would linger a moment longer after she moved, or she'd catch glimpses of shadowy figures behind her that vanished when she turned around. Then her reflection began to change, smiling when she wasn't, or moving when she stood still. Terrified, Claire tried to cover the mirror, but the blanket slipped off during the night. One morning, she found the words, "Let me out," scrawled in the condensation on the glass. Researching the mirror's history, she discovered that Eliza had been trapped within it after performing a ritual to see her true self. When Claire attempted to remove the mirror, she realized it was impossible to lift. That night, her reflection spoke. its voice a chilling echo of her own. Your turn to stay. The next morning, Claire's parents found an empty bedroom. The mirror hung on the wall, its surface now perfectly smooth, and a faint, muffled scream echoed whenever someone stood too close. In the dusty attic of her grandmother's house, Lily stumbled upon an old doll, its porcelain face cracked, yet eerily beautiful. Intrigued, she brought it down to her room, unaware of its dark history. The doll once belonged to a girl named Evelyn, who mysteriously vanished one stormy night, leaving behind whispers of a jealous spirit. As Lily played with the doll, strange occurrences began. Shadows darted across her walls, and chilling whispers echoed in the silence. One night, she awoke to find the doll sitting upright at the end of her bed, its glassy eyes seemingly fixated on her. Heart racing, she tossed it aside. The next day, her friends wouldn't speak to her, their faces twisted in fear. Lily felt the weight of 1,000 stares, empty and cold, settling deep within her. Desperate, she researched the doll, uncovering the truth. Evelyn's spirit had never left, trapped within the porcelain shell, seeking revenge on those who dared disturb her rest. That night, Lily returned the doll to the attic, but it was gone. Instead, she found a note pinned to the wall in Evelyn's childish handwriting. Now you play with me forever. In the cluttered attic of her aunt's Victorian home, Sophie uncovered a faded carnival mask, its once vibrant feathers now brittle, and its painted smile cracked. Something about the mask compelled her, and she brought it to her room as a quirky decoration. Little did she know, the mask belonged to a performer named Margot, who disappeared during a masquerade decades ago, leaving behind rumors of a sinister obsession. The moment Sophie hung the mask on her wall, strange things began happening. At night, muffled giggles filled her room, and faint music played as if from a distant ballroom. When Sophie wore the mask on a whim, she experienced fleeting moments of disorientation, her reflection showing someone else's face, a glamorous yet menacing figure. Haunted by these occurrences, Sophie dug into the mask's history, uncovering tales of Margot's untimely demise after a jilted admirer swore she'd never leave the masquerade alive. The mask, cursed by Margot's restless spirit, ensnared anyone who dared claim it. One evening, Sophie awoke to find herself dressed in an old-fashioned gown, the mask fixed to her face. Her reflection now stared back with Margot's mocking smile. Sophie tried to destroy the mask, but it always reappeared, and every morning she found herself more and more like Margot. The final message, scrawled on her bedroom wall in lipstick, sealed her fate. The show must go on. In the dim light of her attic, Clara discovered an old, dust-laden camera, its leather strap cracked with age. Intrigued, she decided to test it out, keen on capturing memories of her quiet home. After a few trial shots, she turned to her reflection in the attic mirror. As she pressed the shutter, a strange sensation prickled her skin. The flash illuminated the corner of the attic, where shadows twisted unsettlingly. Brushing it off as her imagination, she continued snapping pictures, each click echoing in the stillness. Later that evening, Clara developed the photos, her anticipation mounting. But when the images emerged, her heart dropped. In every shot, lurking behind her were figures, pale, twisted shapes that seemed to leer at her. Panic set in as she realized that in the last photograph, one figure was closer, its eyes glinting with malice. That night, she heard a whisper, a raspy voice calling her name, growing louder until it filled her head. The next day, Clara vanished without a trace. The camera remained, the last photograph still hanging in the air, waiting for another unsuspecting soul to discover its sinister secret. While cleaning out the cluttered basement of her family's century-old manor, Clara discovered an antique locket resting inside a cracked jewelry box. Tarnished yet alluring, the locket seemed to call to her. Curious, Clara opened it, revealing the sepia-toned portrait of a young girl with sorrowful eyes. What she didn't know was that the locket once belonged to Isabella, a child who vanished under mysterious circumstances long ago, leaving whispers of betrayal and rage. Clara began wearing the locket, unaware of the curse it carried. Soon, her nights were plagued by vivid dreams of drowning, and the faint sound of sobbing echoed through the halls. Objects moved on their own, and mirrors reflected more than just Clara's image. One evening, she woke to find water pooling around her bed, and Isabella's voice pleading, "Save me." Panicked, Clara sought answers, uncovering a tragic story of jealousy and murder. Isabella's spirit, bound to the locket, sought not just justice but company in her eternal misery. When Clara tried to return the locket to its resting place, she found it tightly clasped around her neck, the clasp broken and immovable. That night, she found a single message etched into her bathroom mirror. "You're mine now." In the heart of a forgotten cemetery, a young boy named Eli stumbled upon a grave overgrown with brambles. The name was barely legible, etched into crumbling stone: Abigail. Intrigued, he knelt down, brushing away dirt, when a soft whisper filled the air. "Help me," it pleaded, sending shivers down his spine. Eli glanced around, but the cemetery was empty, save for the rustling leaves. Compelled, he pressed his ear against the stone. "They won't let me go," the voice lamented, sending his heart racing. Each day after school, Eli returned to the grave, drawn by the whispers that grew more frantic. "Dig. Find me," it urged, as if urging him to uncover long-buried secrets. His friends warned him to stay away, but the allure of the voice consumed his thoughts. One fateful evening, driven by a mixture of dread and curiosity, Eli brought a small shovel. As he dug, the soil felt unnaturally cold. Suddenly, the ground shifted, and Eli's hands brushed against something slick. Panic surged. He unearthed a small, hollow casket. When he opened it, he screamed as a shriveled hand grasped his wrist, pulling him into darkness. The whispers ceased, and the cemetery fell silent, waiting for the next curious soul. In a dusty attic, Sarah found an old porcelain doll, its painted eyes glinting mischievously in the dim light. Intrigued, she took it home, thinking it would make a perfect gift for her younger sister, Lily. That night, as the house settled into silence, Sarah heard a soft voice drifting from the doll. "Help me," it whispered, sending chills down her spine. Dismissing it as her imagination, she fell into a restless sleep, the doll perched ominously on her bedside table. The next day, Sarah noticed oddities. Lily spoke of a new friend who told her secrets about their family, things no one but Sarah had known. As dazed, the whispers grew clearer, revealing truths that spiraled into darkness. The doll shared the tale of a girl named Eliza, who had gone missing decades ago, a girl who had once owned a similar doll. One stormy night, Sarah awoke to find the doll gone. Panic surged as she rushed to Lily's room, only to discover her sister was missing too. In her place was the doll, now with eyes that seemed to glimmer with malicious glee. The last whisper echoed in Sarah's mind: "You'll find her where I once was lost." The attic door creaked open, inviting her into the darkness. Every night, the light in the old hallway flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that twisted across the walls. Clara had grown accustomed to it, dismissing it as a mere electrical fault. But tonight felt different. The air was thicker, charged with an unsettling energy. As she passed the doorway, the light dimmed, and a shape seemed to flicker just at the edge of her vision. She halted, heart racing, peering into the darkness. Nothing moved, yet she felt a presence behind her. She spun around, but the hallway was empty. Shaking off the feeling, Clara returned to her room. The flickering resumed, more insistent now. Each pulse of light revealed the outline of something, tall, slender, and impossibly still. She grabbed her phone, the screen illuminating the room, and cautiously stepped back into the hallway. The light was brighter now, almost blinding, and as it flickered, the shape morphed, growing closer with each pulse. In an instant, the light went out, plunging her into darkness. Clara was frozen, terror gripping her as she felt cold breath on her neck. The moment the light flickered back on, she gasped, realizing she was not alone. There in the glow stood a version of herself, eyes wide with horror, trapped in a silent scream. The old house creaked with age, but it was the whispers that unsettled Mia most. Each night, as she settled into her bed, the soft murmurs drifted down from the attic. At first, she dismissed them as the wind or her imagination, but they grew more distinct, forming a haunting chorus of unintelligible words. Curiosity gnawed at her until, one fateful night, she resolved to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight, she climbed the rickety stairs, the air growing cold and thick with unease. The whispers swirled around her, now sounding like pleas. "Help us," they seemed to beg. Heart-pounding, Mia pushed open the attic door. Dust particles danced in the narrow beam of her light, revealing a cramped space filled with forgotten relics and darkness. As she stepped inside, the whispers intensified, surrounding her like a clamoring crowd. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into suffocating blackness. Panic surged. She stumbled back towards the door, but it slammed shut, trapping her inside. The whispers transformed into laughter, low, mocking, and hungry. They were no longer pleas, they were promises. As the last light of her sanity dimmed, Mia realized she was not alone. She never would be again. Emily always loved the old mirror in her grandmother's attic, its ornate frame a relic of the past. One stormy night, seeking solace from the thunder, she climbed up to gaze into it. As lightning illuminated the attic, she noticed something strange. Her reflection smiled back at her, even though her own lips were pressed into a thin line of confusion. Heart racing, she blinked, certain it was a trick of the light. But the reflection remained, grinning wider, eyes glinting with malice. Panic surged through her as she stepped back, but the reflection didn't move. Instead, it raised a hand, beckoning her closer. Against her better judgment, Emily leaned in, drawn by an inexplicable force. Suddenly, the glass rippled like water, and without warning, her reflection lunged forward, yanking her into the mirror's depths. Trapped in the cold, dark void, she screamed, but it echoed only within her mind. Outside, the mirror reflected the attic, still and quiet. In the glass, Emily's reflection now wore her face, wearing a satisfied smile. It whispered softly, "Your turn to be me." And in the stillness of the attic, the last flicker of lightning faded, leaving only the reflection watching, waiting. In the forgotten library of her great-uncle's mansion, Emma unearthed an aged, leather-bound journal. Its cover was scarred with claw-like marks, and its pages smelled faintly of soot. The journal seemed blank at first, but as Emma turned the pages, words began to appear in a childlike scrawl, describing the life of a boy named Samuel who vanished under strange circumstances during a fire. Intrigued, Emma kept the journal close, unaware of its ominous power. Each night, more entries surfaced, recounting Samuel's growing fear of the shadow, a sinister figure that tormented him. Emma began hearing faint whispers while reading, and flickering shadows danced across her room's walls, even in complete darkness. One night, she woke to find the journal open on her desk, the words "I see you" freshly inked. Frightened, Emma researched the mansion's history and discovered that Samuel had tried to warn his family of the shadow before he disappeared. Now, the journal served as a beacon, drawing the shadow to its reader. When Emma attempted to destroy the book, she found it untouched on her nightstand the next morning, its final message chilling her to the core. "You're next." The shadow lingered after that, growing closer each night, until Emma's reflection vanished from